Germany banned it outright. The UK censors cut it to pieces, and one of these made its director permanently unemployable in Hollywood for the better part of a decade. Number 15. Xtro, 1982. Nobody was ready for Xtro. Not the censors, not the critics, and honestly not even the people who made it. This British sci-fi horror hybrid came out of nowhere in 1982 and immediately got itself slapped onto the UK's video nasty list, which put it in the same company as some genuinely depraved stuff. The fact that a sci-fi film about alien abduction ended up there tells you everything you need to know about how aggressively ugly this thing gets. The setup sounds simple enough. A man disappears, gets abducted by aliens, and comes back 3 years later. His wife has moved on. His young son barely recognizes him. But something came back wrong, very wrong, and what follows is one of the most deeply uncomfortable alien invasion films the decade produced. Director Harry Bromley Davenport made this thing on a shoestring. The budget was somewhere around $200,000, and it looks it. But Davenport was smart enough to use the low budget as a feature rather than a bug. The practical effects are grotesque in that handmade, visceral way that CGI can never quite replicate. There is a birthing sequence in this film that reportedly caused walkouts at early screenings. People were not prepared. The film got picked apart by censors on both sides of the Atlantic. The BBFC demanded cuts before they would certify it. In Germany, it was pulled entirely. The American release was trimmed down enough to get an R rating, but what was left was still plenty disturbing. It made around $5 million worldwide, which is not bad for a film that cost almost nothing to produce. And despite the banning, despite the outrage, Xtro developed a serious cult following that has only grown since. Davenport eventually made 2 sequels, neither of which came close to matching the original's deranged energy. Number 14. Lifeforce, 1985.
Loss of control.
And the man, the guard, was dead when you came into the room. You found him as he is now.
Yeah.
Tobe Hooper directed this one fresh off the back of Poltergeist, riding what should have been serious Hollywood momentum. Instead, he delivered a film so strange, so relentlessly bonkers, that the studio genuinely did not know how to sell it. Cannon Films had handed Hooper $25 million, which at that point was one of the largest budgets the company had ever committed to. What they got back was a naked space vampire apocalypse set in London. That description sounds like a joke, but it is not. The film is based on Colin Wilson's 1976 novel, The Space Vampires. And the plot involves a British-American space mission discovering a derelict alien spacecraft hidden inside Halley's Comet. Inside the ship, they find 3 humanoid figures in suspended animation. They bring them back to Earth. This is a mistake. The female figure, played by Matilda May, wakes up, escapes, and begins draining the life force out of everyone she encounters, triggering a zombie plague across London. May spends the majority of her screen time completely unclothed, which became the thing most people focused on when the film came out. And that was a genuine problem for Hooper. The actual filmmaking underneath all the sensationalism is ambitious and technically impressive. Henry Mancini did the score, John Dykstra handled the effects. The production design is legitimately spectacular, but censors in several countries had serious issues with the content. The combination of graphic violence and the extended nudity got the film cut for multiple international releases. The original cut ran 116 minutes. The American theatrical version was trimmed to 101 minutes and had several of the more explicit sequences removed entirely. It bombed at the box office, pulling in barely $2 million against that $25 million budget. Critics were divided and mostly confused. Hooper's Hollywood career never fully recovered. Number 13. Scanners, 1981.
The pain begins in your flesh.
David Cronenberg had already established himself as someone willing to go, places other directors would not. But Scanners was the film that put him on the mainstream radar, whether the mainstream wanted him there or not. The head explosion in the opening 10 minutes is one of the most iconic practical effects shots in the history of science fiction cinema. It also immediately guaranteed the film was going to have trouble with censors. The concept is deceptively straightforward. Scanners are people born with extreme telepathic and telekinetic abilities. A shadowy corporation wants to weaponize them. One scanner, played by Stephen Lack, is recruited to infiltrate a network of rogue scanners led by the genuinely terrifying Michael Ironside. That head exploding at the start is just the opening statement. Cronenberg wrote the script during production, essentially handing pages to the crew each morning. He later admitted this was not ideal and that the film has structural problems because of it. The middle section drags in ways that a tighter script would have avoided, but none of that matters when Ironside is on screen. His performance as Daryl Revok is one of the great villain turns of the era, menacing and intelligent and completely unhinged in exactly the right proportions. The BBFC in the UK passed it, but demanded cuts to several of the more visceral scanning sequences. West Germany refused to certify it at all for theatrical release. Several American regional censorship boards pushed back against the uncut version. It was made for about $4 million and grossed around $14 million worldwide, which made it a genuine commercial success for Cronenberg. That success is part of what gave him the leverage to eventually make Videodrome, which caused an entirely different set of problems. The practical effects work, supervised by Dick Smith, still holds up completely. Number 12, Escape from New York, 1981.
You're Snake Plissken, ain't you?
John Carpenter had just come off Halloween when he made this one, and the studio was expecting something equally commercial. What they got was a grimy, paranoid, deeply cynical vision of America that made studio executives deeply uncomfortable for reasons that had nothing to do with the violence. The politics of Escape from New York are right there on the surface, and they are not subtle. The premise is elegant. It is 1997. Manhattan Island has been converted into a maximum security prison. No guards inside the walls. The president's plane goes down inside the prison. Snake Plissken, an ex-Special Forces soldier played by Kurt Russell, is sent in to retrieve him. He has 22 hours before the bomb planted in his neck detonates. Carpenter made this for $6 million and shot the night exteriors in East St. Louis, which was cheap enough and sufficiently post-apocalyptic looking that it passed for destroyed Manhattan without much effort. The film has a texture that bigger budgeted productions could not manufacture. It feels genuinely dangerous in the way that only movies made with real limitations tend to feel. Several countries had serious issues with the content. The South African censorship board banned it entirely, citing the depiction of a black character, the Duke of New York played by Isaac Hayes, as a legitimate authority figure commanding white prisoners. That particular objection says more about South Africa in 1981 than it does about the film. In the UK, the BBFC required cuts before certification. Several scenes involving violence were trimmed for the theatrical release. It made around $50 million worldwide against that $6 million budget and became one of the defining cult films of the decade. Russell's Snake Plissken became an instantly iconic character. The sequel, Escape from LA, came 15 years later and could not come close to recapturing what made the original work. Number 11, Videodrome, 1983.
Control hallucination to the point that it will change human. And Max Wren can do nothing to stop it.
This is the one that genuinely scared people, not because of the violence, though there is plenty of that. Not because of the body horror, though Cronenberg pushes it further here than he ever had before. What scared people about Videodrome was the ideas. The film is about television as a weapon, about media as a tool for controlling human perception, about the point at which technology stops being something you use and starts being something that uses you. In 1983, those ideas felt uncomfortably plausible. James Woods plays Max Wren, a cable television programmer who stumbles onto a pirate broadcast signal called Videodrome. The signal features extended torture and murder, nothing simulated. Wren becomes obsessed, and then things start happening to his body that should not be physically possible. Cronenberg wrote and directed this one with complete creative control, which Universal gave him on the basis of Scanner's commercial success. They probably regretted that decision when they saw what he delivered. The studio pushed for cuts. Cronenberg pushed back. The final theatrical version was still heavily trimmed from Cronenberg's original cut, removing several minutes of the more extreme body horror sequences. In Australia, the film was refused classification entirely on first submission. The censorship board eventually passed a cut version for restricted release. The UK required significant edits before the BBFC would certify it. It made only $6 million domestically against a roughly $6 million budget. Universal considered it a failure, and the relationship between Cronenberg and the studio ended badly. But no other film from the decade predicted the coming relationship between human beings and screens with anything close to Videodrome's accuracy. Roger Ebert called it a brilliant and challenging film and gave it 4 stars. He was largely alone among mainstream critics at the time. The reappraisal took years, but eventually the consensus caught up with Ebert completely. Number 10. The Thing 1982. John Carpenter made this one right after Escape from New York, and if studio executives were uncomfortable with that film's politics, they were completely unprepared for what The Thing did to audiences. When it opened in the summer of 1982, it got destroyed. Critics called it stomach-churning, nihilistic, and morally reprehensible. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars and said it was a great barf bag movie. It opened the same week as E.T., and got absolutely buried. The premise is straightforward. A research team in Antarctica discovers an alien organism that can perfectly imitate any living creature it absorbs. Nobody knows who is still human. Trust collapses completely. And what follows is one of the most relentlessly paranoid and viscerally upsetting science fiction films ever made. Rob Bottin supervised the practical effects work and reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown by the end of production from sheer exhaustion. He was 22 years old. The creature transformations he designed were so aggressively grotesque that censors in several countries demanded cuts before they would allow a theatrical certification. Finland refused to certify the uncut version at all. The BFC in the UK required edits to multiple sequences. Universal was furious about the reception. They had expected a commercial blockbuster and gotten something that sent audiences stumbling out into the street looking shaken. The film made only $19 million domestically against a $15 million budget. That was considered a significant failure at the time. What happened over the following decade was one of the most dramatic critical reversals in Hollywood history. Gradually, the consensus flipped entirely. By the 90s, The Thing was being called a masterpiece. Today, it regularly appears on lists of the greatest science fiction films ever made. The same qualities that made critics walk out in 1982 are precisely what makes it so enduring now. Number 9, Robocop, 1987.
Where's your partner? Where's your partner? Well,
Paul Verhoeven had only made one American film before this, Flesh and Blood, which itself had serious trouble with censors across multiple territories. So, when Orion Pictures handed him a script about a murdered cop, resurrected as a cyborg law enforcement machine in a dystopian Detroit, nobody should have been surprised by what he turned in. Verhoeven delivered something so aggressively violent that the MPAA handed it an X rating 11 consecutive times before he finally cut enough to scrape past with an R. The film is a savage satire of corporate greed, Reagan-era privatization, and American media culture.
okay.
The villains are not foreign threats or alien invaders. They are corporate executives in expensive suits making cold calculations about human lives on spreadsheets. The violence is not incidental. Verhoeven designed it to be so extreme that it forces the audience to confront what they are actually watching and why they are enjoying it. The scene where Murphy gets shot apart by Clarence Boddicker and his crew was so graphically brutal that even after all the MPAA cuts, it remained one of the most disturbing sequences in mainstream studio filmmaking. Several countries required additional cuts beyond what the MPAA had already demanded. West Germany attached an adults-only classification. The UK version was trimmed further by the BBFC. Orion was nervous right up until release. The marketing was genuinely uncertain how to position a film this strange and this violent coming from a major studio. What they discovered was that audiences were completely ready for it. Robocop grossed over $53 million domestically, which nobody had predicted. Verhoeven has always been direct about his intentions. He wanted to make a film about America eating itself. He succeeded completely. The satire is so precise and so specific that watching it today feels less like revisiting history and more like reading tomorrow's news. Number 8, Re-Animator, 1985.
Besides, I do not like people in my room. All right, that's enough.
Stuart Gordon had been running a successful theater company in Chicago when he decided to adapt H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West, Re-Animator stories for the screen. What he produced was so defiantly excessive that it essentially created its own genre category. Empire Pictures released it without an MPAA rating because submitting it for certification was a waste of everyone's time. The film was never going to get anything other than an X, and Gordon knew it. The setup pulls directly from Lovecraft. Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs in a performance so committed it borders on frightening, is a medical student who has developed a reagent that can reanimate dead tissue. He moves in with fellow student Dan Kane and begins conducting experiments in the basement. Things escalate rapidly and completely. The practical effects were handled on a budget of around $900,000, which sounds impossible given what ends up on screen.
Losing their minds before they even have a chance.
He's brilliant, but a little weird.
Gordon and producer Brian Yuzna found ways to make every dollar look like 5. The decapitation sequence, which involves a severed head continuing to operate independently, became one of the most discussed and argued over scenes in 80s horror science fiction. In Australia, the film was refused classification entirely on first submission. The censorship board eventually passed a heavily cut version for restricted release. In the UK, the BBFC demanded significant edits. Several European countries banned it outright. Even in America, local censorship boards in more conservative regions refused to allow it to screen. It made $9 million theatrically in the United States, which on a $900,000 budget was a genuine commercial success. Combs became an instant cult icon. Gordon went on to make several more Lovecraft adaptations, none of which matched the original's anarchic energy. Re-Animator remains the definitive Lovecraft film by a considerable distance. Number 7, The Fly, 1986. Cronenberg keeps appearing on lists like this one because no other mainstream filmmaker of the decade was this consistently willing to go to genuinely dark places. The Fly is based on the 1958 film of the same name, but what Cronenberg made has almost nothing in common with the original except the basic premise. A scientist accidentally merges his DNA with a housefly during a teleportation experiment. What follows is not a monster movie. It is a film about disease, bodily disintegration, and watching someone you love become unrecognizable. Jeff Goldblum plays Seth Brundle and gives what is probably the finest performance of his career. The transformation from brilliant eccentric to something barely human is gradual and devastating. Gina Davis plays the journalist who falls in love with him before the accident and has to watch what happens after. The relationship between them is written and performed with a level of emotional intelligence that most serious dramas never achieve, let alone body horror films. The practical effects work won an Academy Award, which is remarkable given how aggressively grotesque some of it is. The final transformation sequence, where Brundle fully becomes Brundlefly, reportedly caused several audience members to become physically ill at preview screenings. The MPAA went back and forth on the rating. Several sequences were flagged repeatedly before the final cut was approved. In West Germany, the film was given an adults-only classification and required additional cuts for theatrical release. Australia demanded edits to multiple sequences. Several countries refused the original cut entirely. It grossed over $60 million domestically against a $15 million budget. Critics were overwhelmingly positive, which surprised everyone. Pauline Kael called it viscerally overwhelming. Cronenberg had somehow made a studio film that was genuinely uncompromising, which almost never happens. Number 6, They Live, 1988.
Fuck it.
John Carpenter had been frustrated for years by the reception to The Thing, and had spent most of the intervening years making films that performed below expectations. They Live came out of that frustration, and it shows in every frame. This is an angry film. Deliberately, unapologetically angry. The premise is that a drifter discovers a pair of sunglasses that reveal the world as it actually is. The ruling class are skeletal aliens. The advertising is subliminal mind control. The media is a pacification device. And the message hidden in every surface is the same. Obey, consume, submit. Roddy Piper plays the drifter, John Nada, and he is perfect in the role. Not because he is a great actor in the conventional sense, but because he brings a physical presence and a working-class authenticity that no polished Hollywood actor could have replicated. The film's most famous sequence, a nearly 6-minute alley fight between Piper and Keith David, was reportedly choreographed over 3 weeks and performed almost entirely without stunt doubles. Several countries took serious issue with the film's content. The political messaging was considered inflammatory in certain territories. South Korea restricted screenings significantly. Several South American countries required cuts to the more explicitly political sequences before certification. The MPAOA in America passed it with an R rating, but flagged the violence extensively during review. Carpenter was required to trim several moments from the fight sequences before final certification. It made $13 million domestically against a $4 million budget. Critics were mixed. Some called it heavy-handed. Others recognized immediately what Carpenter was doing. The allegory is not subtle because it was never meant to be subtle. Carpenter wanted the message to land like a fist. It did. In watching it today, the satire feels less like metaphor and more like documentary footage. Number 5, Deadly Friend, 1986. Wes Craven had just come off A Nightmare on Elm Street and had serious commercial momentum behind him. Warner Brothers gave him a budget and a premise that should have produced a straightforward teen sci-fi thriller. What came out the other side was something so tonally fractured and so unexpectedly violent in certain moments that the studio panicked, demanded reshoots, and ultimately released a film that satisfied nobody, including Craven himself. The setup is genuinely interesting. A teenage robotics prodigy moves to a new town with his mother and his incredibly advanced robot, BB. He falls for the girl next door, Samantha, who is being abused by her father. When Samantha is killed, the boy implants BB's computer chip into her brain to bring her back. What returns is not quite Samantha anymore. The film was originally conceived as a more emotionally nuanced science fiction story about grief and identity. Test screenings went badly, and Warner Brothers decided the problem was insufficient horror content. They ordered Craven back for additional photography, specifically to add gore. The result is a film with a serious identity crisis. The first half plays like a coming-of-age drama. The second half suddenly produces one of the most absurdly violent death scenes of the entire decade, involving a basketball and a human head that comes completely out of nowhere. The BFC in the UK required cuts before certification. Several European territories demanded edits to the more graphic sequences. Australia classified it for restricted audiences only after edits were made. It made around $10 million theatrically, which was considered a significant disappointment given Craven's profile at the time. He later spoke openly about his dissatisfaction with the final cut, describing the studio interference as creatively damaging. The film exists in a strange limbo, too compromised to be taken seriously, too interesting to be completely dismissed. Number 4, Hardware, 1990. This one technically crosses the boundary into 1990, but its production was entirely rooted in the late 80s underground scene, and it belongs here. Richard Stanley made Hardware for just $1.5 million and delivered something so visually ferocious and so unrelentingly bleak that the MPAA and the BBFC both lost their minds over it simultaneously, which is actually quite an achievement. The setup is post-apocalyptic. A soldier brings home scraps of a destroyed robot as a gift for his sculptor girlfriend. The robot, a military killing machine designated Mark 13, is not actually destroyed. It begins reassembling itself inside her apartment, using whatever materials it can find, including human components, and sets about completing its original directive. Stanley shot the film in 30 days on a derelict soundstage in London. The production design is extraordinary given the budget. The visual influences are everywhere. Dario Argento, Tobey, Hooper, Jean-Michel Basquiat. And the result is a film that looks like nothing else from the period. Iggy Pop appears as a radio DJ. Lemmy from Motorhead has a cameo as a ferryman. The soundtrack is relentless industrial noise. The MPAA gave it an X rating on first submission. Stanley cut it down to scrape an R. The BBFC in the UK was equally troubled and required additional edits before certification. In Australia, the film was refused classification on first submission. It made around $5 million theatrically in the United States, which given the budget was a reasonable return. But the controversy followed it everywhere. The uncut version circulated on bootleg tapes for years, which only amplified its reputation. Stanley was developing genuine momentum as a filmmaker. Then he made The Island of Dr. Moreau in 1996, and that was the end of that particular story. Number 3, Liquid Sky, 1982.
From aliens.
Oh, and you have protection from aliens?
This one came from completely outside the Hollywood system, and censors genuinely did not know what category to put it in, which turned out to be part of the problem. Slava Zuckerman made this film for around $500,000, financed independently, shot on the streets of New York with a cast of performance artists and club regulars from the downtown scene. It is the most aggressively alien film on this entire list, and it has actual aliens in it, which is saying something. The premise involves tiny invisible aliens landing on a Manhattan rooftop. They are drawn to heroin and to the chemical released in the human brain at the moment of orgasm. They begin harvesting it. The film follows a bisexual model named Margaret, played by Anne Carlisle, who also plays a male rival in a dual performance that should not work nearly as well as it does, as she navigates this world of drugs and predatory men and avant-garde fashion while people around her begin disappearing. The film is simultaneously a savage critique of the downtown club scene, a feminist revenge narrative, and a genuinely strange piece of science fiction that uses its alien premise as a structural metaphor rather than a genre device. It is also extremely graphic in ways that gave censors in multiple countries serious difficulties. In the UK, the BBFC refused certification on first submission and required significant cuts before approving a restricted release. Several European countries banned it outright. Australian censors refused the original cut entirely. It grossed over $1 million in New York City alone, which on that budget was an extraordinary return. Word of mouth spread it across the country through repertory cinemas and midnight screenings. Zuckerman never made another narrative feature. Liquid Sky remains a completely singular object, impossible to categorize and impossible to forget once seen. Number 2, A Boy and His Dog, 1975. This one predates the strict 80s timeline, but its theatrical run and its censorship battles extended deep into the decade, and it belongs in this conversation. L.Q. Jones adapted Harlan Ellison's 1969 novella on a budget of approximately $400,000 and produced something so deeply uncomfortable that it generated controversy everywhere it screened for the better part of a decade. The setting is post-apocalyptic America, 1984. Vic, played by Don Johnson before Miami Vice made him famous, wanders the wasteland with his telepathic dog Blood, who is considerably more intelligent than Vic and considerably more moral, which is a low bar. They scavenge and survive. Blood finds women for Vic. The film is brutal and darkly funny, and deeply misanthropic in ways that mainstream science fiction simply did not do. The ending is what caused the most sustained controversy. Without detailing it precisely, Vic is forced to choose between his dog and a woman he has feelings for, and the choice he makes, and the casual cheerfulness with which he explains it to Blood, afterward generated genuine outrage from feminist critics and advocacy groups throughout the late 70s and into the 80s. Several countries banned the film on those grounds alone. The BFC required significant cuts before certifying it for UK release. Australia refused the uncut version entirely. Several American regional censorship boards blocked theatrical screenings in their territories. Harlan Ellison himself had complicated feelings about the adaptation, publicly criticizing certain elements while acknowledging that Jones had captured the essential spirit of the novella. The film made back its budget and then some through theatrical and home video releases. Don Johnson has never quite explained how he feels about it. He tends to change the subject. Number 1. Tetsuo, The Iron Man, 1989. Nothing else on this list comes close. Shinya Tsukamoto made this film in Japan for approximately $150,000. Shot it in black and white on 16mm film over several months, working on weekends with a cast of friends and collaborators, and produced something so viscerally overwhelming that censors across the world essentially had no framework for dealing with it. The plot, to the extent that one exists, involves a businessman who hits a metal fetishist with his car. The fetishist dies. And then, metal begins growing out of the businessman's body, slowly at first, and then all at once. The film runs 67 minutes and contains almost no conventional narrative structure. It is closer to a sustained nightmare than a story. The imagery is relentless, industrial, sexual, violent, and deeply strange in ways that defy simple description. The practical effects were achieved through stop motion, prosthetics, and a level of physical commitment from the cast that borders on inexplicable given what they were being paid. Tsukamoto directed, shot, edited, and acted in the film simultaneously. The result has a texture unlike anything produced before or since, like a fever dream assembled by someone who had absorbed every Cronenberg film and every piece of industrial noise music ever recorded, and then processed it through something genuinely personal and genuinely disturbed. In the UK, the BBFC refused certification on multiple submissions, before finally passing a cut version for extremely restricted release. Australia banned it entirely for several years. Several European countries refused it outright. In the United States, it circulated almost exclusively through underground screenings and bootleg copies for years before receiving any legitimate release. It won the top prize at the Rome Fantasy Film Festival in 1989. Word spread through the international film community with unusual speed for a film this difficult to actually see. Tsukamoto made a sequel and eventually a third entry in what became a trilogy. None of them match the original's sheer ferocity. Tetsuo is a singular act of filmmaking aggression, the kind of film that resets your understanding of what the medium is actually capable of. These 15 films got banned, cut, buried, and dismissed. Censors lost sleep over them. Studios disowned them. But the movies that make people truly uncomfortable are usually the ones that last. Decades later, the outrage has faded, and what remains is the filmmaking, and most of it holds up completely.